Well, I think I was into bikes since I was a little kid. I remember looking at the back of Popular Mechanics, at the mini bikes and the back of Popular Mechanics, you know, the ones you could assemble yourself. And I used to think that there was an older fellow who rode a Suicide Shift Indian where I lived. And I used to watch him go down the road, you know. I was 5 or 6 or 7 years old and watched this old fella. And I met him later on in life, and it turned out he still owned the motorcycle. 1937 Chief, 1938 Chief. Anyways, and used to watch him ride this old Indian up and down the road, and I thought, man, I'm going to do that when I get older. And then dreaming about mini bikes, and then finally my dad bought me a little Rupp mini bike or something, and away we went, right? That's the way it all happens. Well, this motorcycle is a 1978 R100S. It's got about 100,000 miles on it now. I bought it a few years ago. I know it hauled a sidecar when at some point in its life, the previous owner was the original owner of this motorcycle. So he put about 50,000 miles on it, and I've put about 50,000 miles on it. When I bought it, it needed a little bit of restoration. It had, like I say, it had been worked pretty hard with a sidecar and needed engine work. And I painted this bike. It's not original paint on it, and it was bought from Tony's Cycle World in Sarnia by a friend of mine. And the original warranty card for it is sitting over there on that wall there. So maybe if something goes wrong with it, I can take it back to Tony and he can he'll warranty it. But anyways, it's been a good bike, and it's fast. It's geared high. It's a highway motorcycle, that's for sure. It's probably got the highest gearing that BMW put on their motorcycle. So it can comfortably cruise at 130 kilometers an hour all day long, and at the end of the day, it idles just like it did at the beginning of the day. It runs good. It's 40 millimeter carbs with a 38 millimeter exhaust system. The 77s used a 40 millimeter exhaust system, and they went from they only did that for 1 year in the 77s with the 40 millimeter exhaust system, and then they went back to the 38s again. It's a strong bike. It pulls hard and runs clean. I use a GPS on it, the GPS Bluetooth into my helmet, so I can find my way through Montreal instead of having to look at some sort of tank bag road map, and it's a lot easier to do that. But I've taken it out east, and I've taken it down on the Blue Ridge Parkway. It's a strong motorcycle. It's nice cruising motorcycle. At the end of the day, it's smooth, and it's not too tiring. This motorcycle I bought 6 years ago at an auction, an estate auction down in Kingsville. It had come apart in 1970, and I know that because the carburetors were wrapped in 1970 newspaper, and everything was in a big steel bin. Complete bike was apart, engine was apart, engine was out, transmission was together but out of the bike. Semi-rolling chassis, but missing a few odds and ends, headlight, ring, and a few other things it was missing, and I put it back together again. It's original paint bike, 1956 R69, so it's this frame and this motorcycle had only been in production for about a year at when this bike was made. So it has small quirky things, some gussets missing off of the frame, and some other things that were unique to that year. So it's fairly desirable bike in my mind. The only thing that was missing when I put it back together were the valve collets, which are small pieces, and everything else in the whole motorcycle was there. I just bolted it together. And like I said, original paint, and the fellow that owned it, he had owned it since new, and he and his wife had done multiple trips to the West Coast on it. Very nice motorcycle, and I was lucky to get it. This bike here is a 1957 Norton. It started life out as a Dominator, and obviously it's been cafe'd. I bought it. It had been cafe'd probably in the early 70s. It's got an Ian Kennedy triple clamp on it. It's got John Tickle brakes on it, which are kind of period accessories at the time when you're cafeing these kind of bikes. It's a wide line 750 Norton, so it's a wide line frame. It's got alloy tanks, oil tank and gas tank from the tank shop in England, and it's you know, the riding position isn't exactly touring, but it's a nice old bike. This bike here is the first Norton that I built. It's a bit of a Bitsa bike. It's a 750 post-combat engine in a 69 frame. I bought the engine from a
kid down the street who would chop the rest of the frame, and bought a rolling chassis and put it together. It's a real solid motorcycle. Doesn't leak oil, fast and reliable once you do a little bit of engine work to it. And I've ridden it for years and years, and it's never let me down. I run 18-inch Dunlop K5 91 tires on it. Very nice tires for this motorcycle, and it's fast and fun to ride. This motorcycle here is a 1968 Norton. It's a fastback, they call it. It's got this unique tail section on it. That was a 1 or 2 year old only tail section. It's got the original badges that were only put on in 1968. Commando engine, of course, isolastic 750 engine, the same as all the other Commando engines. And it has got the early instruments with the solid green spots on them, and it's got the early Atlas style mufflers on it. It's kind of a unique motorcycle. They made these for a couple of years, but they weren't popular in the U.S., so they kind of stuck with the roadsters and the interstates in the U.S. at that time. So this is over here. It's a 1973. It's a 850 Norton. It's a very similar motorcycle to these other Commandos. It just, they bumped up the engine to an 826, and it became their 850 model. They carried it from 1973, 1974 with a kickstart. In 1975, they went to an electric start motorcycle and carried that through to the end of production with the Nortons. Over in the corner there, if you can see them, there's a Honda CR250. I bought it brand new in 1974. And other than that dent in the gas tank there, it's pretty clean shape. I rode it a lot in the sandy area where if you dumped it, it didn't do too much damage. And I rode it quite a bit when I was younger. Put a lot of miles on that bike. And there's a Bultaco 326 Sherpa T over there. I bought it just for a bit of trials riding. And a 125 Rickman with a Zundap engine. That bike, it was dumped in a creek and then left to sit behind a barn for a while. And I picked it up and resurrected it, got it running. I've owned it for quite a while. It's a Rickman frame and nickel-coated Rickman English frame on that bike. So this bike over here, this is a 1970 Triumph. This is the first motorcycle, road-going motorcycle that I bought. It's a 1970 Triumph. It came to me in about 76 or 7. Had a broken gearbox. So I repaired the gearbox and I used it for my daily transportation for quite a few years, going back and forth to work. And then a few years ago, I decided to restore it. So I did full restoration. It's all brand new engine, brand new everything, valves, guides, shells, bottom end. The whole thing's been restored. So it's just a motorcycle I keep to remind me of my youth, I guess. This motorcycle over here is a 1974 Norton. It's very similar to this motorcycle here. It's a 1974 Norton Commando, and it's been restored. It's probably my most original restored Commando. It's an 850, kind of a stock paint scheme on it with the correct pinstriping, reverse cone pea shooter mufflers, and a nice motorcycle. The one over here in the corner, it's my wife's first motorcycle. It's a 1970/5 BMW, so it's an R60/5. It's 600cc opposed twin, flat twin, and I decided that when my wife started riding on the road that it would be a good thing maybe not to have her riding an English bike so that I could have a little less maintenance and a little less trouble on the road. So we started to ride BMWs at that time, and when I bought that, I liked that bike so much that I started building and riding BMWs, and today that's kind of what I do. I ride BMWs, mid-70s BMWs, very solid, reliable machines. I bought this motorcycle from a fellow who had it apart, and he had it apart in his basement for at least 20 years. I'd seen the engine in the basement 20 years before I purchased it. The bike was completely apart. The engine and transmission were together, but the rest of the motorcycle was completely apart. Axles out, headlight off, no wiring. I had to source out bits, and finally, when I was putting the motorcycle together, the fellow wanted to sell,
everything that was in the basement, all his BMW parts. So I bought everything that was in his basement to make sure nothing was left behind. And it was a good thing because the original name tag that rivets onto the frame, there's only one of them in the world, and it was left in the basement when I pulled out all the parts. So when I bought the basement full of parts, I finally acquired the last, I guess, an important bit of the motorcycle. It didn't have a correct rear fender, so from BMW, I was able to source a new one. I called them up and I told them I needed a rear fender for a 1950 R51/2. And Drew looked it up and he said there was 2 in Germany and did I want one, and told me the price, which was I expected it to be a fair bit, and it was. And he said, "Do you want one?" And I said yes. And the good thing was the bike came with our R25/3 fender, which I sold for, it was a new old stock fender too, so I sold it, and it didn't cost me too much. It didn't cost me the $800 that the fender would have cost me, so it only cost me a couple $100. I've gone through the bike. I didn't paint it. All the paint on the motorcycle, except for the rear fender, of course, was as I pulled it out of the basement. Everything was on shelves and shop worn, and there's a scratch in the tank, and it hasn't got any pinstriping on it. But I decided to put the motorcycle together as I found it. I didn't paint anything. I didn't CAD plate or plate anything or chrome anything. The exhaust system, it's stainless mufflers, and they came out of the basement, and the headers came out of the basement just like that. The wheels had been relined, painted with the gray and the black at one time, so I was lucky that way. And the front one was spoked with stainless spokes. The motorcycle is it's a motorcycle that likes to be ridden fast. It likes to be revved out. It doesn't like to be lugged too much. It's it only puts out about 24 horsepower. And when I built it, I thought, can I live with 24 horsepower? Goodness gracious. But I was surprised with the heavy flywheel. It's got like an 8-pound flywheel. It's like a big gyro toy. You wind it up, and and it likes to be revved, so you rev it up, and then you go through the gears, and that big flywheel kind of just carries you down the road, and it's got surprising power for a 24 horsepower motorcycle. A few things I put on these headlight mirrors, which are kind of campy. They actually work well too, because you're not trying to look past your shoulders. You're looking, it gives you a good view of what's behind you. It's got a manual advance on it. Of course, it has no auto advance. It uses a coil ignition. So it's got a small distributor under the front cover, and it uses a coil ignition versus the single cam. The next year would have been a single cam engine that uses a magneto. They went to a magneto like my 1956. It's an open drive shaft on this side here. The drive shaft, because it's not a swinging arm motorcycle. It's a plunger motorcycle. So without the swinging arm, you can have a open drive shaft. So there's just an open drive shaft on this side here. It's still got a hand shifter that's reminiscent of, I don't know why they put the hand shifter on it, because you can't even find the hand shifter when you're riding down the road. You're looking down, you can't even reach it. But it's got a hand shifter on this side, and it's got a foot shift on the other side. Sometimes I think that they left the hand shifters on these motorcycles so that during the war, if you had a sidecar attached to it and the rider got disabled for some reason, that the sidecar fell in the sidecar, he could reach up and use the clutch and then shift it from his side. And I think sometimes that's why. I mean, you could pull in the clutch and jam it to first gear and get out of there before you got shot too, or something like that. But it's only got 9,000 miles on it. I think they're original miles. I think it's original speedometer. I don't know where it came from. I think it was originally bought as a basket case from Detroit, down in the Detroit swap meet or something like that. But it's together, and I put thousands of miles, a couple of thousand miles on it now, and only put it together a year and a half ago. I wrote it last year, and I'm riding it this year as well. So this is a bit of a work in progress. This is a motorcycle I'm building. It's a 1972 Norton Commando. It's a 750. It's the last year of the 750s, or 73 would have been the last year of the 750s, but it's a late 72 post-combat, or it's a combat engine. This one here is a 1972 combat engine. When I'm building, I'm trying to keep it kind of looking like a stock 750 Commando, but when you look at it, you can see there's some major differences right away. It's got a BMW front disc brake on it, a 305 millimeter disc brake with a 4-puck Brembo caliper. It's got a Gremica master cylinder on it. It's got BMW switchgear on the on the left side. Obviously a stock tack and speedo off a Commando. It's got a Corbin seat on it. I'm keeping this original stainless fenders on it. I'm going to use a square headlight, Norton headlight. It's got 18-inch rims front and back. They're DID or Acront rims. I guess they're Acront rims, flanged Acront rims. The engine has seen a fair bit of modification. I'm running a belt drive. You can see that the primary has been drilled. And so it's a dry belt drive instead of a chain drive on the primary. It's got 11-to-1 pistons, something like that, about 11-to-1. I've moved the breather from down low on the crankcase. I've moved it up high here and drilled the right crankcase, and so it'll breathe a little bit better. It's got rear sets on it. The stock foot pegs would have been up farther and a lot heavier, so it's got rear sets on both sides. Stainless exhaust system on it. Ross Thompson, he cleaned up the tank and knocked it out for me, so I've got to paint it. I'm not sure what color I'm going to do. Kind of thinking some wild metallic, you know, green or burnt orange or something like that. That was early Commandos had heavy metallic blues and stuff like that. So I don't know what I'll do. Some heavy metallic on the tank to kind of bring that original Commando flavor back into things again. I don't know, I'm not sure if it doesn't blow up. I think it's going to be a fast bike, and if I can start it, not as young as I used to be, so I better finish it in the next year or so that I can actually kick the thing over and get it running. I'm running a aluminum alloy oil tank on it instead of the big pressed steel one that they would have had, and the battery will be just a small battery that will probably sit open on that side on this custom mount I've made here. So yeah, we'll see. I'll put it together, and it should be a fun bike when I'm finished with it. But old motorcycles are really a time machine. They do bring you back to a place where a point in time when there was no computers and things were more mechanical than they were, especially when you ride a motorcycle that's older than I am, and I'm getting on. And you ride a motorcycle that's older than I am, and it brings you back to a point in time that you can't duplicate. You know, it's a time machine. You're on the road. If there's no traffic around, it could be 1950 again all over, and it's just fun. You don't have to worry about any electronics. If something breaks on the bike, generally you can see what's broken. There's not a lot of hidden electronics in these things. It's all points, and it's all mechanical. It's all mechanical. There's no hydraulics on these old machines. There's no hydraulic brakes. It's all these old machines are fairly simple pushrod motors and pistons and valves. I mean, it all works the same way. So once you start to understand how an engine operates, and you can take it apart without breaking things, then you stand a good chance of understanding how to put it back together.